Chair, we are ready for the evidence of Catherine Peck. Please could I ask Mrs. Peck to affirm as per the card that should be in front of her.
I, Catherine Peck, do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Please could you state your full name for the record?
Catherine Edna Lillian Peck.
Thank you. You are the sister of Richard Harland Elliott, who was born on the 1st of December 1953 and died on the 24th of May 2002 whilst an inpatient on Peter Brough Ward at Clacton Hospital. Is that right?
That's correct.
Thank you. By way of background, is it right that the inquiry sent you what we term a Rule 9 request, requesting your evidence?
Yes, they did.
And in response to that request, you provided a witness statement to this inquiry?
Yes.
And do you have a copy of that in front of you?
I do.
Is it right that at the top is your name, Catherine Peck?
Yes.
And on the last page, on page 40, it is redacted, but it is your signature. Is that right?
Yes, that would be. Mm-hmm.
And it is dated the 5th of June 2025.
Yes.
Could I just confirm that you have recently reviewed the statement on our, and can confirm that it is accurate?
Yes, I have.
And is it right that you would like this statement to be considered as your evidence to the inquiry?
Please.
Thank you. Now, I will be asking you some questions about this witness statement. I will not be taking you through it line by line, but you can be assured that the chair and the inquiry team have considered it very carefully and will consider everything you say in that statement. I would also like to acknowledge that you did provide commemorative evidence to the inquiry last year, and I would just like to state that we are very grateful to you indeed for your assistance with the inquiry. Thank you. Just as a reminder, I will not be asking you to refer to any names of staff members in line with the restriction order that was imposed. We will be structuring your evidence today in 3 parts. First, we will go through a timeline of your brother's involvement with the mental health services. Second, I will ask you some questions about your concerns about his care, treatment, and how you as his sister were dealt with by the trust. And third and finally, I will ask you some questions about your recommendations to the chair in light of your experiences. Now, with that, if I could start with the first topic, which is a timeline of your brother's involvement with the services. Your brother was born on the 1st of December 1953. Is it right that his mental health difficulties began in the 1980s when he was in Canada?
Yes, correct, yes.
And you believe that he was first diagnosed with schizophrenia, is that right?
In Canada, yes.
And when he returned to the UK, still in the 1980s, he continued to have episodes of severe mental illness?
Yes.
Is it right that he had at least 6 hospital admissions between 1985 and 1995 in the UK? And you have summarised these in your witness statement, and I will not go through that in any detail, but is it right that these hospital admissions included admissions to the Lakes Mental Health Centre in Severals Hospital, as well as Peter Brough Ward in Clacton Hospital, where he died? Is that right?
Yes.
And in between these admissions, to begin with, is it right that Richard found it difficult to cope independently, and so he lived with your parents?
Initially, yes, when he came back from Canada.
But his condition did improve, and he did in fact return to work on and off during that time period, yes?
Yes.
And then in the 1990s, he moved into his own flat independently, and in June of 1999, the year before the relevant period starts, Richard moved to a flat in Dovercote, where he moved from a 1-bedroom flat to a 2-bedroom flat. Is that right? Yes. And his records show that he did this because he was able to get better value for money, but also in order to place some distance between himself and his family, because he felt that his parents sometimes overreacted in relation to his health, and he wanted to have greater control about his care and treatment. Is that right?
I think that's his view, yeah. Yes.
Thank you. But from your perspective, you continue to speak to him on the phone, and you continue to see him about once a fortnight during that period, is that right?
Yes.
Now, from 2000 until 2002, your brother had 5 admissions prior to his last admission. There was an admission on the 25th of July at Peterborough Ward in Clacton Hospital, on the 6th of September, on the 27th of February, and then again on the 8th of August the following year in 2001 to Severals Hospital. Is that right?
It seems, yeah.
And you've provided the details in your statement. I'm just summarising them now. But does that sound like an overview?
That's right. I didn't make a note of the dates or anything at the time, but that sounds right.
Thank you.
To the record.
Now, in terms of requests for mental health assessments and how these took place, is it fair to, if I may try to summarise it and you can tell me if I've got it right, Richard was primarily assessed further to requests from your parents, from doctors or the police. Is that right? And these assessments were usually undertaken in an emergency or a crisis situation rather than as part of a treatment plan, if I could put it that way.
Always it appeared, yes.
And they were often associated with his refusal to take his antipsychotic medication. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And he would become very unwell very quickly, and he would not recognise how unwell he was in those moments. Is that right?
That's right.
There were occasions you set out in your statement where there were some delays in him getting assessed, and your parents would have to stall him. You referred to one example where your mum had to stay awake for 2 nights to keep him safe. Is that right?
That's right. She stayed with him in his flat to keep him safe.
So did she go to his flat where he was living independently?
At that time, yes.
But at other times, is it right that he did go to the hospital voluntarily? Whilst, apologies if I could start that again, sometimes he went to the hospital voluntarily, but at other times he would have to be sectioned. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Sometimes, yeah.
And would it be fair to say that there was no process for Richard when his health deteriorated other than to call emergency or crisis services so that he could be given medication in a safe environment?
Yes. I didn't know of any other means of getting help for him until he was in crisis.
Now, as far as his engagement with the mental health services is concerned, would it be fair to summarise it as follows? By 2000, Richard had developed a distrust of the mental health services generally.
That was my feeling. That yes, that's correct. Various things, for various reasons.
For various reasons, and it might be that we will go into those when we discuss your concerns. Is it right that he had? I've taken this from your statement, so please do let me know if this is not right. But that he had no confidence in the service's ability to properly care for or to protect him.
That's correct.
And he thought that health professionals wanted to control his illness with high doses of medication, with the use of restraints, sometimes lengthy admissions, but no treatment of the underlying cause.
That's correct, yes.
And is it right that he was an active member of various organisations that advocated for change within the mental health world?
Yes, yes.
Now, as far as his diagnoses are concerned, you set out at paragraph 17 in your statement, I'm not going to take you through it unless it would assist you, that his EPUT mental health notes record a diagnosis of schizophrenia, bipolar affective disorder, paranoid personality disorder, and acute and transient psychotic disorders. Does that sound right to you?
It's changed, yes, it's equal change. Yeah.
Did it change over the years?
Well, yes, because he came back from Canada, the only diagnosis we knew about was schizophrenia, and I'm not sure how they found out or whether that was what was given to my parents. But he was soon diagnosed as manic depressive, which is it can be bipolar or bipolar as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So his diagnosis changed when he came to the United Kingdom, is that right?
Yes.
Now, still within the timeline, I want to move to his last admission, the 23rd of May of 2002. And after this, we will move on to your concerns, if that's all right. Is it right that you have been able to put together an understanding of what happened in the days before the 23rd of May admission? Because although EPUT destroyed his inpatient records in line with their retention policy, they retained the community mental health records. Is that right?
Apparently, that's what I've been given, yes.
So you have the community mental health records, but not the inpatient records?
Correct.
Thank you. And before the 23rd of May, in fact, on the 21st of May, so 2 days prior, both your mother and Richard's girlfriend had made contact with relevant services to inform them that they were concerned about Richard. Is that right?
That's correct. That's in the notes, but that was 25 years ago, and I had forgotten if I ever knew that took place 2 days before he was contacted by the services.
And it may be that this comes from the notes as well, or you remember, but is it right that he was in fact seen at the Mayfield Day service 2 days prior to his admission, but it was felt that there were no major concerns about him?
Yes, that's right.
And following your family raising concerns, do you know if they ever received a response in relation to an assessment that has taken place or any plan of action in relation to your brother?
Are you talking about the 23rd, 24th?
The 21st, so after the concerns raised on the 21st.
No, I don't believe so.
You don't believe they received any response?
In fact, because they hadn't heard anything, that's why they eventually went to 2 days later to his flat.
Yes.
His partner raised concerns and asked Mum and Dad to go with her, so they went together.
So Richard's girlfriend contacted your parents, and together, is it right that they attended Richard's flat?
Haven't heard anything.
They hadn't heard anything, so they attended the flat. And when they arrived, is it right that they saw a number of people outside of the flat?
Yes, apparently, lots of policemen.
Yes. Is it right that you understand this to have been the rapid response team, which included a number of police officers, Richard's psychiatrist, a GP and a social worker?
I believe, yes.
Yes.
That's correct.
And we may go into this in a bit more detail later, but is it right that you feel that the large number of police officers involved and the large group of people that was generally there outside of his flat appeared to you to be heavy-handed and frightening and inappropriate?
I feel that, and I know that my mother felt that. She was very traumatised by it, and she phoned me later on quite bewildered by the whole thing, and quite, feeling for her son, really, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, is it right that at that time, Richard was encountered and seemed to be paranoid, making threats and accusing his GP of having burgled him?
Yes, I'm not sure if Mum was there at the time.
Right.
Maybe later.
Right.
But apparently this is, according to the notes, what happened, yes.
Yes. And he was detained under Section 3, but your mother tried to reason with him and persuaded him to go in quite calmly, you said, in your statement.
Yes, because he feared being restrained, that he thought he would be harmed, because this restraint was very painful, it was violent and painful. And he had previously had a bad experience. He felt that he would be harmed, if not die, to be honest. And he had told Mum and myself, and I don't know who else, but Mum was certainly aware of his fear. And so she persuaded him that if he went in calmly and peacefully, that he wouldn't be put in restraint. And so he complied.
He was taken to Clacton Hospital, is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Roughly.
And we may cover this in a bit more detail in a moment, but is it right that he arrived at the hospital in the evening at around 6 p.m. and that the inquest evidence that is available suggests that within about 15 minutes, a decision was made to administer Richard with 2 different antipsychotic medications, as well as a lorazepam, another injection as well?
That's correct, yes.
And in a statement drafted for the purpose of the inquest, which you have set out in your witness statement, it was described that Richard lay down on a mattress on the floor of his own free will, and a member of staff injected him 3 times. And whilst he was incoherent, he remained calm. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe that, yes.
And he was then left face down on the mattress alone in the room.
Yes.
We will go into detail of where he was placed and under what conditions, but is it right that having been... Apologies. Is it right that at 5:20 a.m. the following morning, staff noticed his breathing had quietened and entered to find his pulse faint and his lips blue? And emergency resuscitation efforts were initiated, but Richard passed away shortly thereafter. Is that right? Now, an inquest was held, and the coroner concluded that your brother died of natural causes. We understand that that is a conclusion that you simply cannot accept, given your concerns about what happened on that evening. And I will ask you a few questions about the inquest in a moment. Thank you for that and for going through that timeline, which hopefully will set some context to the concerns that you raise. Now, the first concern that I would like to raise with you is what Richard has termed the mental health revolving door. Now, you state in your statement, at various parts of your statement, that Richard had become quite disheartened following every hospitalization. You use phrases like, he became increasingly depressed about his circumstances, he found it harder to be independent, he found it harder to feel like a valued member of society. And medical records from September of 2001 record him saying that he was resigned to the mental health revolving door that he now found himself in, one of discharge, becoming ill, and readmission. To your knowledge, was his own view of his health ever taken into account by his care team?
I can only think he must have told them about the effects that the medication was having on him. Mm-hmm. They always seemed to give him quite strong doses of medication, and that either meant he was putting on weight or affected his sleep or he was sleeping too much. It was very hard to function, and I know right at the beginning, when you probably come back to it, but we tried to find out what other care he could get from the services. But we were just told that there was nothing, he would be treated by medication. So that was his only alternative, I think. To answer your question, sorry.
No, it did answer my question, thank you. And when you say other treatment or other care, I think it is that you said, what was there anything specific that you had in mind?
Well, we expected, because he'd gone through a lot of trauma in Canada, and we could see why he had this initial, I'll call it a breakdown, which I felt it was at the time. And we hoped that they would be able to give him, talk to him about it, talking therapies, and give him some coping strategies, some kind of care plan where he was on medication, but they would review it, they would perhaps tailor it off, something like that. But he appeared to just come out with heavy medication as his only option.
To your knowledge, was there a treatment plan that was aimed at breaking the cycle of readmission?
Not in the first 20 years of his illness, I would say. Oh, sorry, not in the first 20 years. Probably about 10, 12 years. This was the cycle that he was in. I do not know when he moved to Dovercourt whether he was under another team that might have helped him.
Mhm.
He certainly accessed more day centres and more bodies of people that perhaps he could talk to, that he could help and they could help him. But in the early days, there was nothing, nothing.
You state at paragraph 26 of your statement, to my knowledge, the only procedure recommended to our family when Richard's mental health appeared to be deteriorating was to call the emergency or crisis services for help so that medication could be given in a safe environment in a secure hospital. I note in particular the use of the word when Richard's mental health appeared to be deteriorating. Did it feel as though the treatment plan treated this as an inevitability, that he would inevitably get worse and another call would have to be made? Or did you feel as though the treatment plan really saw a way out of that cycle?
Hard one to answer. I mean, initially we hoped that it would be one episode, one breakdown, and that he would get better. That's what everybody hopes, isn't it? But we just saw that this cycle appearing in his life, that he would have to reach a crisis point and then we would have to take him to the hospital. Mm-hmm. There was no one else to turn to that could come along and talk to him, that could give him any help, any... sorry, I'm going to... Yeah. So that's the treatment initially. That's the only way we knew to get him help. So each time you would hope that that was the last time. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, very early in his care, he was very heavily sedated. He was put on depot injections, which meant that lasted from one injection to another, and he couldn't... he was just sleeping, eating, and going to work. Right. That's what he was doing. And there was no way out for him except to stop his medication, which is what he did. And then, of course, he got ill again eventually. And we went through that cycle all over again.
Right. Thank you. I would like to ask you about your family's involvement as well in his care and in his treatment. Now, you have stated in your statement that, if I've understood it correctly, that you do not consider that you or your family were really listened to when you attempted to provide your views about his care and his treatment. Did you know what processes you could follow in order to raise any sort of formal complaints or concerns? No.
We had no knowledge of anyone undergoing a breakdown, and we weren't shown or pointed to any access to anything really that would help us.
Were you able to raise concerns in an informal capacity to anybody involved in his care?
I think my mother spoke to his GP about it, but again, there wasn't anything forthcoming apart from take the medication as it's prescribed, and then he won't get ill, or that was the thought. Mm-hmm. But Richard felt that he couldn't perform, he couldn't tell a joke, he couldn't join in a conversation. He shuffled when he walked. He was dumbed down, if you like. Mm-hmm. He was quite a bright person. He had a good sense of humour. He would have liked to interact with people more, but he found he couldn't. Mm-hmm. And so that option wasn't one he wanted to entertain. And he thought that perhaps he wouldn't get ill again. Perhaps he would be able to show them that he can cope. So that's, the alternative was always take the medication in the quantities that we said. And yes, we weren't listened to. In fact, we were told by the doctor after the first real breakdown that he had that they didn't do talking therapies. They didn't do that. It was treated by medication, and we had to accept that.
What would you have liked them to hear you say? What was it that you felt they weren't appreciating enough?
Well, Richard was the oldest of the boys and his brothers, and he, I think, took that role quite seriously. So he thought that he would be the first to get married, the first to buy a home, the first to have children, etc. And that was important to him, to be a success. He went to Canada hoping for a new life, but unfortunately he was divorced there. He lost all his money because they'd sold the house in England. He'd lost all his money, his precious dogs that he'd taken over there for company and everything. In the end, he couldn't afford to keep them, so he had to find a new owner for them. And he just lost, I think he felt he lost respect, really, whether that was just his view. So to me, he went through a lot of trauma. He was sober for surfing. He didn't have a home to go to. And eventually he's dispatched back to England to start all over again. Now that must be traumatic for anybody. And nowadays, maybe you could access counselling, but it didn't appear to be what was accessible then.
Thank you.
Thank you. If I could turn to the period 21st to 24th of May, because I understand your biggest concern is the manner in which he was treated in the days and hours before his passing. Now, I want to first ask you about delay. You expressed concern about the delayed response from the mental health services to your parents and to Richard's girlfriend, because they both, as we've already discussed, raised concerns 2 days prior on the 21st of May, but he was not admitted until the 23rd. Now, you state, and you stated to us in evidence today that there's no record and you have no recollection of there being any response to your family raising concerns over his deterioration. And for an acutely unwell individual, a delay of 2 days can be quite critical, is what you say in your statement. Now, this may seem like a question with an obvious answer, but what is your concern about that delay?
Because you didn't seem to be able to access the service who would come in and be able to help Richard. It appeared that he had to reach that critical point where he was sectioned every time. Mm-hmm. And that certainly was the case on this occasion. They had warning 2 days before and yet didn't act on it for 2 days. Now, with somebody like Richard, from experience, he deteriorated very quickly. We're talking about a matter of days from when he was able to function and go to day centres and visit friends and everything, and very quickly they needed to respond. They had enough experience to know that they needed to respond quicker. Mm-hmm. And so the situation they found themselves in on the 23rd, they went in prepared for a serious situation, and that didn't perhaps need to be.
Mm-hmm. Had they responded 2 days prior? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Because on other occasions, people had gone to him, the service had gone to him, and he had taken medication. He had taken it voluntarily. He ended up in hospital anyway, but he was trying to stop himself from ending up in that situation, so he may have responded had they seen him earlier.
Yeah. Thank you. I would like to ask you about the manner in which your brother was met at his flat on the 23rd of May. We've referred to the number of police officers and the big rapid response team that attended. And you suggest in your statement that instead of going in so heavy-handed, the clinicians should have sought to provide Richard with therapeutic reassurance from the outset instead of relying on the police. What do you mean by that? I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about that.
They seemed to threaten him. He was trying to take control of his life. They needed to get him on board with their actions to show that there was an outcome that didn't mean a loss of necessarily of his liberty, over medication, etc. Also, Richard responds to my mother, he responds to me, he responded to females in general. And so being confronted with lots of men in riot gear or protective clothing, whatever you call it, just is a challenge, was a challenge to him. He could see that he was going to be forced to do something. Instead of being persuaded, he was going to be possibly forced. He didn't have any choice in the matter. But when Mum, I might be going ahead here, but when my mum, dad and his partner went to the flat, my mother talked to him and she asked the female police officers if they would escort Richard if he agreed to go with them. And see, there are ways round these things, but they don't ever ask. They didn't ever ask the family anything. All about him. You know, you get to know somebody, you know what they respond to. Mum knew what he would respond to.
Thank you. I would like to move to the restrictive practices that were used on the 23rd of May when he attended the hospital. I would like to start with the chemical sedation. Now, you note across your statement, and you've just told us about how your mum was able to calm him down before he went to the hospital with the police officers. You state that Richard was in fact calm when he arrived at the hospital, and you note to the fact that the inquest evidence seemed to confirm that as well, that at least one of the statements suggested that he remained in a calm manner. But as we've already discussed, within 15 minutes he was subject to chemical sedation, as you put it in your statement. Now, do you know what assessments took place prior to these injections?
No.
And so the basis on which that decision was made, do you know?
I think it was made before he even entered the building, before he came in, they decided what to do. Because, Richard had a sense of humour, he would have played with them a little bit. So he would have, I'll walk in on my own time, you know, I've got control of this. But if he wandered off to the, to somewhere else, he could have been persuaded, and he was persuaded to go into the right area. He knew where to go. The whole thing took 15 minutes. If he was calm, if he was complying, if he wasn't resisting, when did they make that assessment?
Your witness statement sets out that there was some known history of aggressive behaviour, which, the way that you phrase it, appeared to drive some of the preemptive decisions made about sedation, but also about seclusion and a heavy-handed approach more generally. am I right in understanding here that your point is that these assumptions were not reassessed in light of the man that arrived that evening, but were rather made, as you said, before he arrived? Have I understood that point correctly?
I think so. I can't see anywhere where they reassessed the situation, apart from they said they had a meeting about 4 hours later and decided to withdraw the observation. So at that point they had some kind of assessment, but he was already medicated by then in a seclusion room, lying on the mattress. Yes.
So is your point essentially that decisions were made before they looked at who it was that in fact came through the doors at the hospital?
It sounds like it, yes, it seems like it.
Thank you. You raise concerns about the use of overnight seclusion when Richard was clearly in a vulnerable state on admission. What concerns do you have about his seclusion?
I'm going from the notes because I never saw the seclusion room. But the notes that we got from the coroner's inquest said that the patients in the beds just outside the seclusion room were moved. So when they decided to withdraw the observation, they moved the patients out of that unit to somewhere else. And then they closed the outer door and they had these other doors. So obviously the two sets of doors into the seclusion room, they closed one, and then somebody was supposed to be sitting outside the second door, outside the second door. So that raises concerns for me because he was heavily sedated, apparently just lying on a mattress in a room where one set of doors were closed and the other was open, and there was supposed to be somebody outside. But if he got into any distress or anything like that, who would have heard, But I don't think he was in a position anyway. I think he was too sedated to.
Thank you. This may link, in fact, to the concern about clinical observations, because you note that Richard's vital signs should have been regularly monitored, especially given his breathing issues and the fact that he was sedated. And from your statement, it appears that the last observation that you are aware of was at 3:30 a.m. when the gold neck chains were observed to be too tight and a few of them were removed with some difficulty. Now, is it right that following the inquest, it still remains unclear to you what level of observations Richard was subject to, and therefore the frequency of his monitoring in the hours prior to his death?
From the notes, there appeared to be only 2 occasions that his vitals were taken. And from the notes, I can't understand whether there was consistently somebody sitting outside the room. Some notes say 2 people, some notes say 1. When Richard got into difficulty in the morning, I don't believe anyone was outside his room. Right. And that they came back and found him in distress or lack of vital signs, lack of noise, because Richard would have snored. Right. So you would have heard him breathing. So, and by then it was too late. When you mentioned when they took the chains off, it was something like his gold chains, they took 3 of them. So 9 hours after he was sedated, he was still almost unconscious and not able to help them or himself. Yeah. Why weren't they taking taking his vital signs more frequently. They mentioned about his breathing. They noted about his breathing, being laboured and his sleep apnea. So they were aware of it. He should have been monitored all the time with regular vitals taken. So, from my point of view, the observations were inadequate.
I understand. You've also stated in your statement, and I'm going to read it, it's at paragraph 93, I believe, that our concerns as a family have been amplified by the fact that my parents were subsequently told by ward staff following Richard's death that the staff nurse responsible for monitoring Richard in the hours prior to his death left her post. What do you mean by left her post?
Well, obviously, I've got it third hand, but my mum counted, and I can't recall now whether it was the same morning that Richard died or the following morning, but some of the staff from the ward came to visit them, and one particular nurse, mum recounted that she broke down in tears and said that she was really sorry. She wasn't observing him when he got into distress.
Right.
So from that, my parents assumed that the trust or that the hospital were taking accountability for what had happened, and that they would just get they would get an apology perhaps at the inquest, and what they got instead was very uncomfortable, to say the least.
You note that he had breathing issues, which should have been recognised and monitored. And you note that had they been recognised and monitored, his condition may not have deteriorated to the point of becoming essentially fatal. Now, had he had these breathing difficulties in the past, was this something that you think was relatively well known about him?
It should have been. It really should have been. He had asthma. He had bronchitis. He had an inhaler. He had sleep apnea. And they knew about his breathing, and sleep apnea was a term that was mentioned in their statement, in one of the nurse's statements. So they had knowledge of it, but didn't seem to take that into account, in line with the fact that he'd had a very heavy sedation.
Yes.
And hardly moved in 9 hours when they came to take these gold chains off him, that he wasn't breathing properly when they took the gold chains off him. Why didn't they bring somebody? They were in a hospital. There's a hospital next door. Why didn't they bring someone over to check on him at that point? 9 hours later.
Yeah. Thank you.
I mean, I'm not a nurse or an expert in these things, but from reading their observations and the notes, I was very distressed to see that if you go into a hospital for an operation, which I've been, when you've been under sedation, there's a nurse there all the time checking on your vital signs, making sure you come round in a certain amount of time, etc. He wasn't afforded that care.
Is it the case essentially that even following the inquest, you do not in fact know what happened in the few hours prior to his death?
No, I don't. As I say, there seems to be contradictory statements or statements that contradict each other. There are things that they should have done that they didn't. And so, no, I don't know. If I go into a little bit of detail, and I don't know whether it's something you would bring out later, but his airways were blocked, his lungs were blocked with mucus, his liver had me. This wasn't a 5-minute thing. This had been happening over the night. It doesn't sound very nice, but he couldn't breathe.
Yeah.
If he couldn't breathe, if you can't breathe, your heart will give out, and that's what happened.
Yeah.
So I don't think even at the inquest they looked into it in enough detail. All that I've received doesn't give me any confidence that they did. If there's any notes that they used that we haven't seen, then please let us have them, because I'd like to understand it better. To give a verdict of natural causes when somebody can't breathe because their heart then gives out, because they had a congenital defect in their heart that they didn't know about, it's not right to me. There's something not right.
If I may turn to the inquest now, and ask you a few questions about that. Now, I understand you were not personally involved in the inquest proceedings, but your family was. Your family attended, although they were not represented.
Sorry, my mum, dad were going as next of kin, and
Yes.
my brother took them. I wasn't able to go because I was working,
Yes.
and they thought it was going to be straightforward. So, yeah.
Yes.
So,
It was a day-long inquest, and there were some written statements that were read out, and a few witnesses provided oral evidence. And is it right that your parents speak of being blindsided by the trust's defensiveness and also attacks on Richard's character?
Definitely, yes. It wasn't about the person that they had treated for 12 to 15 hours. It was they really brought out. They ran my brother down completely, as if it was almost like it was his fault.
Mm-hmm.
He was in this situation, and the outcome. That they seem to be making excuses for what had happened on their watch. If I put it like that.
Yeah.
And they were traumatised. They came home from the hearing, and my brother as well, and they were just stunned.
Mm.
They didn't want to hear it anymore. They didn't want it to be released in public. They didn't want his character to be, the defamation of character, if you like, wasn't the person that they knew, wasn't the person that I knew. And yeah.
Did you feel as though, or do you know if your family felt as though they were able to meaningfully participate in the inquest?
My brother pointed out that he knew nothing about the inquest system, what they were entitled to. They were given a date and asked if they wanted to attend, so they did. And it wasn't until the end that the coroner said, "Are there any questions you would like to ask?" Well, they listened to all of this. They listened to all those statements. Apparently the trust had a lawyer. There was no jury to our knowledge or recollection. And, sorry, what was the question?
Whether your family felt they were able to participate?
Well, no, to that is no. They knew nothing about the procedure for an inquest, what was expected of them, what they were allowed to do. They hadn't gone with any questions. They hadn't seen any of these statements before, and I don't know if that would be procedure anyway, but they had no way of knowing what was going to be said or produced at the inquest, and no way of reacting to it either. They came away quite stunned and upset.
And do you think that the inquest helped you and your family understand in any way what happened to your brother? No.
No.
You note in your statement that your brother formally notified the coroner's court of his disagreement, that is the brother that attended the inquest, of his disagreement with the findings regarding the cause of death. Did he ever hear back? Do
No.
you know?
No.
Thank you. Those are the questions that I propose to ask you in terms of the concerns that you raise. Before we move on to recommendations for change, is there anything else that you wanted to say today?
More family, there needs to be more family involvement in
Yes.
people's. We tried at the beginning and nobody listened to us, and then it just seemed as though the only way was to keep him safe, try and let him be independent and go back to his old life, his old jobs and everything like that. And then we just got into that cycle of, oh, Rich is ill, it has to be a crisis, he goes into hospital.
Mm-hmm.
The more that happened, the worse it was for him. Was also worse for the family. You have hope at the beginning that could be an end to it, or you could keep it to a minimum. But when there are no care plans for anyone to look at, no procedures in place that you can view, nothing you can work towards other than that cycle and reacting to it. So I feel that families should be very much included wherever possible, and I know that possibly some patients might say, I don't want them to be involved, but they still have a lot of they could still have a lot of input into understanding the patient, because if you only see the patient when they're very ill, you're not going to know their character, you're not going to know their personality, you're not going to know what they like, dislike, and what they are in the community, or you're just going to see a sick person, and then you'll think you made them better and you send them out again.
Yeah.
So that's one thing, and also the inquest procedure. I hope it's different now. I did listen to Inquest, the charity. I did listen to what they said, and I do hope it's different, because there are so many questions we have 20 years later, or 25 years later, that possibly could have been dealt with a lot earlier. And my mother's life was totally wrecked. It was. She never got over the fact that she persuaded Richard to go in that last time. In spite of that, he passed away, and then at the inquest they blackened his name as much as possible to more or less make it seem as though it was his fault that he ended up in that situation. It wasn't. He went in calmly, he complied. She had persuaded him to do it all so he didn't get hurt, and she lived with that.
Thank you. You've set out just now two of the recommendations that you wrote in your witness statement, for which I'm very grateful. So the first, obviously, being family involvement, and thank you very much for your further comments in relation to that, and also the reform and post-death investigations, the inquest in particular, which you've set out again very helpfully and clearly in your statement. You also mentioned in your statement a recommendation to the chair that the provision of appropriate and individualised care plans is necessary, especially where patient situations are not allowed to be so critical that the only option for treatment is inpatient admission. And you recommend within that collaboration with family members. Thank you for those recommendations. Are there any other recommendations that you would like to make, or is there anything else that you would like to share with this inquiry at this stage?
only that there's a lot of people seeking help for various reasons because they're struggling, and I would want them to be able to seek help and not be put off. This isn't about putting people off when they need it, and I know there are lots of families who struggle and wait to be seen, and I can't see why there can't be some kind of triage where people refer to a particular body and it's their job to go out and find out what the problem is immediately and make referrals or signpost the people or give them literature that's going to help. Because there are all sorts of people that need to access extra help and they shouldn't be afraid to do it, and they should be able to receive it, but quickly. The quicker you act on something, to my mind, the less it impacts on their life. They're not waiting, not able to live their life until they get their problems sorted out. And I really think the quicker the mental health service acknowledge that person has a problem, whatever it might be minor, could be serious. The quicker that they acknowledge it and give them some kind of a care plan that they can and their families can view, I think that would set so many people's mind at rest. To know the time frame that things will be looked at. With us 40 years ago, nearly, there didn't seem to be any alternatives. We were on that cycle, which was on that cycle. As things have progressed, I'm sure people are now more accepting of talking type therapies, counselling, cognitive behavioural therapy, medication where necessary, groups of people that can share the problem. And then sometimes there are so many different charities and offsprings of the health service, you don't know where to start. So if one person was to say, you can access this body, there's a group meeting on a Wednesday, you can go along to that. Just give them all the information that they need up front. Don't leave them waiting. Even ADHD, autism, it just goes on and on. They need help right at the beginning. In the long run, it will pay because you won't have that revolving door so much. Because you help people right at the beginning of their illness. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Peck, for your evidence today. You have provided us with a picture of your brother, and if I could ask that be put onto the screen for a few seconds. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Mrs. Peck, thank you very much indeed for your evidence. We're very grateful for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask that we take a short break of 10 minutes, following which, if there are more questions for the witness, we will take them then, and if there are none, then we will proceed with the closing statement from counsel to the inquiry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Griffin.
Chair, we are now at the end of this July hearing. Our gratitude goes out to those who've shared these most personal experiences with confidence, courage, and expressions of love. They are being heard. We are left with a series of stark images reflecting a lack of empathy and humanity over the years. Ed Jackson, who was just 18 and alone and bullied on an adult ward, whose belt was returned to him as he'd lost so much weight his trousers were falling down and other patients were teasing him, and who died using that belt. Pippa Whitewood, the mother of a young baby, who was restrained and handcuffed to a bed when she attended A&E in crisis. Richard Harland Elliott, who, as we've just heard, was heavily sedated and, lying in a seclusion room, died alone, and whose sister, Catherine Peck, has serious concerns that he'd not been monitored sufficiently. 88-year-old Jeff Toms, who the inquiry heard was, quote, basically put in a chair and they would take his walker away from him so that he couldn't get up and move, so much so they even put him in nappies, even though he wasn't incontinent, close quote. Who was also becoming malnourished to the extent that you could see his pacemaker, who suffered falls on the ward and, quote, looked like he had been mugged, close quote, and who died within days of admission. It is difficult also not to be moved by the strong feeling from some of our witnesses that the deaths of their relatives could have been avoided. Adam Rowe has explained how his family are very angry about the way in which his mother, Mandy Hitch, was treated and failed, and that, quote, we all believe that if she had been given the care and treatment she needed and deserved, she would still be with us today, close quote. We also heard the deep frustration of families who were not being listened to. Karen Pym, a nurse working close to her son TJ Pym's unit, who was, quote, particularly shocked that despite my repeated calls to the unit, TJ had been assessed without the clinical team seeking my involvement or even informing me that it was taking place. As the staff knew, I was just minutes away and wanted to provide important contextual information about TJ's presentation and history, close quote. He was discharged without paperwork. He died later the same month. Janet Carden, who also had nursing experience and wanted to speak to a member of staff on her brother W4's ward, who did not understand, quote, how you can help somebody with a mental health condition if you don't know what struggles they are having in the world outside the ward. And Chair, of course, we've just heard something similar from Catherine Peck. Back to Janet Carden, who, quote, had to wait for quite some time outside the glass box before anybody came to hear what I had to say. It felt a little bit like being the naughty girl at school, close quote. And who was shocked to learn that the staff had allowed W4 to make a financial contribution to their Christmas party, which struck her as, quote, a completely unprofessional and incorrect thing to have allowed to happen, close quote. Jane Mayer, sister of Dan Fairman, who was, quote, thrown into an absolute flat spin panic, close quote, on being given just 2 hours' notice of his discharge, who told us his family, quote, were left feeling totally let down by a system that gave us no choice or input in Dan's care, close quote, and who was also left feeling that the British mental health system, quote, can't cope with mental health patients and they don't know what to do with them, close quote. We heard also about Pippa Whitewood, who'd been taken far from home to Staffordshire and Winchester due to the lack of beds in mother and baby units, MBUs, and whose sister, Lydia Fraser Ward, quote, will never be able to imagine exactly what she went through, but it must have been so terribly, terribly frightening and terribly hard for her. And it is deeply unfair that they felt that the best way to treat someone in that state was to continually just send them off somewhere else. It wasn't taken into account how that distance would affect someone, close quote. We heard more of the family experiences during the processes that follow a death, including inquests, and anger at the Trust's defensive approaches. Ed Jackson's family was not legally represented at his inquest, although the Trust was. His brother Ben Jackson retains, quote, a sense of my mum's anger about that inequality of arms, close quote. He spoke of the burden of being asked to hold someone to account whilst, quote, also dealing with the fact that this was incredibly painful on a personal level, close quote. Emma Cracknell gave similar evidence about having to put a complaint in, although it was the last thing she wanted to do, given everything else she was having to deal with following the death of her mother, Susan Spring. Patrick Brennan told the coroner at the inquest of his son Liam Brennan that he found the Trust to be defensive and not transparent. In his view, the duty of candour should be, quote, an ethical code by which you live in your working environment, and it presupposes that every day is a school day and that you're going to learn professionally, both in terms of your continuing professional development, but also in terms of genuinely understanding when things go wrong. Hold your hands up and let's make sure it doesn't happen again, close quote. That was not the approach exhibited by the Trust in his dealings with them, he said. And of course, we heard this afternoon that Richard Harland Elliott's family was, quote, blindsided by the Trust's defensiveness and attacks on his character. Alan Oxton believes that the inquest following the death of his father, Stephen Oxton, came to the correct conclusion in that the state was responsible. But it and the other processes he's been through have not given him the answers he was seeking in order to finally achieve some sense of closure. And that brings us to this inquiry. Emma Cracknell has described the processes she went through following the death of her mother, Susan Spring, including the inquest. But at that time, she and her father had no idea there were other cases. They thought it was just them. She explains that, quote, it is so sad there are so many others. It's a weird feeling to be relieved to be one of many, but to be so sad so many others have been through what we've been through, close quote. The inquiry will, of course, need to get the Trust and staff perspective of working in mental health inpatient units. We know that there are many experienced and dedicated people who work hard and in their patients' best interests. And there were glimpses of good practice given from the perspectives of the witnesses and their family members during this hearing. Fred Peck spent time both at the Lakes and on the Peter Brough unit. His daughter, Emma Sorrell, described the lakes as feeling more like a prison than a hospital, but Peter Brough as more of a warm, calming, nurturing environment, both physically and therapeutically, although there are strongly differing views of this ward over time. Pippa Whitewood spent one night in Broomfield, but it was so bad she wanted to write a book about it afterwards. In contrast, she wanted to nominate the Staffordshire MBU for an award. She mentioned an advocate who had an oversight and support role whilst she was there. In this context, it's important to note that 3 days ago, on Friday, the 11th of July, the CQC published its latest inspection report in respect of EPUT's acute wards for adults of working age and psychiatric intensive care units. The relevant wards were inspected in November and December last year. The CQC has 4 ratings: outstanding, good, requires improvement, and inadequate. The CQC has upgraded the overall rating for this service. It was previously rated inadequate. It is now rated as requires improvement. We are considering the report. Over the last week and today, we've heard about a range of wards and units and experiences at different times, both before and after the merger that created EPUT. I've drawn both from the evidence in this hearing room and the written statements our witnesses have provided. The examples I've referred to are just some of the instances contained in the many moving accounts we've received. There are many more that I could have relayed. And we return to hear more evidence from the bereaved families in our next hearing, which starts on the 13th of October. NHS England says that 1 in 4 adults and 1 in 10 children experience mental illness, and many more of us know and care for people who do. It is common. It can affect all of us, but it does not receive the attention it merits. Chair, I know it's your hope that the Lampard Inquiry contributes to a wider conversation, that the public will engage in, and that the media will reflect on these experiences. Thank you very much.
We are now going to finish for the day. Before we do so, I just wanted to thank all the members of my team who have helped witnesses in the, I think we can all say, daunting task of formulating and presenting evidence, for which we are very grateful. I wanted to thank the engagement team led by Vari Hughes. I want to thank the legal team, Kieran Coleman, Hugh Johnson-Gilbert, and the council team who took witnesses through their evidence, particularly Rachel Troop, Kian Parks and Kirsty Lee. I'm grateful to all of them. Thank you very much indeed. And that is the end of our proceedings
Thank you, Chair.
for the moment. Thank you.